What's up, guys? Welcome back to another daily Bible reading snapshot. Today we're starting this little book in the Old Testament called Lamentations, which you might even catch it in the word. It's about a lament. It's a sad song. And just kind of like the book of Song of Solomon was the happiest song that's ever been written here in the Bible, Lamentations is the saddest song that's ever been written. What is it about? Well, we think it's written by Jeremiah, who's just continuing to talk about this. It's very well put together. So it's definitely a song. And the reason I call it a song is because it has different parts that all kind of fit together to give it this element of rhythm. And it's written like a poem, and there's parts, and it moves from one thing to another. And some of it is like an acrostic poem where it starts with A and then B and then C and then D. And it's all beautiful. But the problem is, it's all about this sad stuff that's going on in Jerusalem. What's happening? Well, remember from the book of Jeremiah, what is happening in Jerusalem? The people rejected God. God is bringing terrible disasters on this city because they deserve it. And it says that in this first chapter, it says, how lonely sits the city that was full of people, right? At one point, Jerusalem was full of people, not just full of any people, full of righteous people. It says it sits lonely. She weeps bitterly in the night. Judah has gone into exile because of affliction and hard servitude. The roads to Zion, they mourn. None come to their festivals. Their gates are desolate. It used to be this land teeming with people and life and excitement, and now death. Terrible things are going on. Her foes have become the head. Her enemies prosper because the Lord has afflicted her. Why? For the multitude of her transgressions. Her people have gone away, captives before the foe. Which you might think, well, this person's just complaining about all the bad stuff God's doing. Well, no, be careful. Read what it says. It's saying that this is just. God is doing the right thing here. It hurts. It's hard, but God is doing what's true here. Verse 8 says, Jerusalem sinned grievously. Therefore, she became filthy. All who honored her despise her now, for they have seen her nakedness. She herself groans and her face turns away. It's like she's just treated with all this shame. Why? Because she's sinned. And it says the Lord has afflicted her in these ways. And then verse 18, the question that we should be asking ourselves, is God right to do all this? It says, yes, the Lord is in the right. For I have rebelled against his word. But hear you people, see my sufferings. And then he says, I called them my lovers, but they've deceived me. Remember how Jeremiah kept talking about how the Judeans had all these foreign nations and gods that they went after that were like the people that they were cheating on with their spouse, right? It's like they're living with their spouse, but then they had all these affairs with all these people. Those are the lovers that are talked about here. You call on your lovers, well, guess what? They have deceived you. They can't help you. No other God can help you, whether it's up in the north, whether it's down in the south in Egypt. No one can help Judah when God is bringing judgment because you've been very rebellious. Now, chapter 2 goes on further. It kind of starts with this idea of how the Lord has put a cloud over Jerusalem. It's this picture, right? This very poetic image of it's like it's dark. There's darkness over this land. The Lord has swallowed up without mercy. God has been hard on these people. The Lord has become like an enemy, verse 5, which is interesting. That's the idea. God has become like the enemy of these people. You think, well, God is for these people. If God is for them, who can be against them? Well, God is not for them in this situation. God is disciplining them. It says God has become like their enemy. He scorned his altar, disowned his sanctuary, delivered into the hands of the enemy. What is going on? Well, the prophets, they were lying. They were telling lying visions about God, and people didn't listen to the prophets, specifically the author of this book, Jeremiah. It says, your prophets have seen for you false and deceptive visions, and they have not exposed your iniquity to restore your fortunes, but have seen for you oracles that are false and misleading, which is so interesting. He says, you guys were listening to preaching and to prophecy that instead of calling out and exposing your sin, was just telling you how good you were. Right? You went after false teaching, which how often does that happen in our world today? That even so-called Christians love false teachers because they make them feel good. Be so careful about that. Don't listen to any false teaching, especially if you're immature and can't handle it and can't distinguish what's true and what's false. Don't listen to any of it because you might be tempted like this to fall into these temptations. Now, he goes on. He says, in verse 19 and beyond, he says, arise, cry out in the night. O Lord, look and see. Verse 20, see the affliction. Why should women eat the fruit of their womb and the children of their tender care? Recognize what he's saying there. What is going on in the city of Jerusalem? There are women who are giving birth to their children, and because of the amazing, horrible starvation. These babies are dying and they are eating their own babies. They're eating their own flesh. And it says, should priests and prophets be killed in the sanctuary of the Lord? Look at the picture that's being painted here. Stare at it. I know it's scary, right? Think about how bad this was. You need to see how bad this was to appreciate the book of Lamentations. We're not just singing a sad song. The sad songs today are so dumb, right? They're about how someone broke up with me and, she went away and, this guy doesn't like me anymore and he abandoned me. Right? No. This is sad. There are women eating their own children in the city of Jerusalem. There are prophet and priests that are killed in the house of God. It's like saying there's pastors getting, shot in their own churches, and women are having to eat their own babies because of how terrible the oppression is. Think about that. Look that in the eye. That's what Jeremiah is looking in the eye. How can you look that in the eye and think, well, God is involved in all this? That's a very hard thing to do. But we have to go back to what he said earlier, that God is right. Because these people have rejected God. They have spurned God's rules. They have not embraced him. And that's what the book of Lamentations is going to be about. But tomorrow, we're going to see hope. In the midst of all this, Jeremiah says, I know that God's steadfast love endures forever. I know that he'll be good to his people. I know that he will restore Israel. I know that he will restore and rebuild the city of Jerusalem. I know that he'll continue to show steadfast love. Great is your faithfulness. We're going to talk about that tomorrow, though. So now here in the book of Hebrews, looking at chapter 7, Hebrews 7 is finally, we're getting to that section that was going to be talked about in chapter 5 about the high priestly work of Jesus and how he's a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. So Melchizedek is an important character to understand. Who is he? Well, remember Genesis 14, he and Abraham have this conversation and Abraham gives him 10% of everything he had. He tithed to him, so to speak. And he says that he didn't have a father or a mother, which I don't think actually means he has no father or mother. I think the point is he has no genealogy in the Bible. We don't know where he comes from, right? And in a similar way, right, Jesus' genealogy is complicated because technically he's not really born of Joseph and Mary. He's really just born of Mary and the Holy Spirit, which is a hard thing for people to understand. He has no father and mother in the same way that we do. It says it's beyond dispute, verse 7, I think, which this is the point of talking about Melchizedek. It's beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior. Who blessed who in this situation? Abraham or Melchizedek? Who blessed who? Well, Abraham certainly gave stuff to Melchizedek, but the reason was because Melchizedek blessed Abraham before God. What is he trying to get at? The author of Hebrews is saying, who's better, Melchizedek or Abraham? Well, the people of Israel will think, well, Abraham's the best, right? Well, the author of Hebrews says, no. Melchizedek was even closer to God than Abraham was. How can that be? God made these promises to Abraham. Well, because Melchizedek was a priest of God, and he's saying, look, Abraham has descendants, and in Abraham's descendants, you get the Levites, the Levitical priests, Aaron, Moses, all those people that were involved in the priesthood. You get those people. But when Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek, it was kind of like, and he says something kind of weird. He says, in the loins of his ancestor, Levi, the Levites were recognizing that Melchizedek's priesthood was better than the Levites' priesthood. Right? This is confusing. This is what he was talking about. This is why I said it's confusing. What's the point? Well, Jesus is a priest after the order of Melchizedek, not Aaron, not the Levites. He's not a Levitical priest, right? And he says the Levitical priests, they had to offer sacrifices over and over again, but Jesus doesn't have to offer sacrifices over and over again for his sin. No, Jesus is sinless. He's perfect. He's descendant from Judah. He's not even from Levi. So he quotes again, Psalm 110, verse 4, and he says, you're a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. He says there's a better hope for what God is doing through this. He says, therefore, this makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant, which is the point. He's the priest in a new covenant here. It says the former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing their office, right? They died. But he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. He's not going to die. He's already risen again. Consequently, he's able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them, which, again, is a key theological truth that the only reason you can talk to God, the only reason you can bow your head and pray to God and God will hear you and God will listen to your prayers in an efficacious way is because Jesus stands between you and God and he takes those prayers to God and they're presented to him on Jesus' behalf, or Jesus presents them on your behalf. That is the only way that your prayers have any power with God, right? Obviously, God can listen to any prayer and do anything, but the point is Jesus stands between. He says, therefore, it's fitting that we have a holy high priest, a sinless, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners high priest who's exalted because when he died once. His payment was once. His sacrifice was one time, and he continues forever as our priest. Very interesting, very important that Jesus is our high priest. And that's kind of the bottom line. I know it's like, well, it was a lot of talk for what? Well, to say that Jesus stands between us and God. But the author of Hebrews gives us some explanation for why you shouldn't value the Levitical priests higher than Jesus as a priest, because those Levitical priests were just a picture of what Jesus was really going to do, not the other way around. Jesus is not some plan B, secondary option that these Jews could go to if the Jerusalem stuff doesn't work out. No, this was the ultimate thing that they should be embracing. And really, it's the ultimate thing that you and I should be embracing too. So interesting that we are talking about Jewish law on the other side of the world 2,000 years after this was written, 3,500 years after it was originally written by Moses. And it's so interesting that God continues his work, and it's important for us to know because Jesus is our King. He's our high priest. So thanks for reading. We'll see you back tomorrow for another daily Bible reading snapshot.